All right.
Good.
Well,
So, Mike, you're ready to go.
oh, great. Okay. Well, good morning to those of you on the East Coast or here in the U.S., and good afternoon to those in Europe or further afield. I'm really happy to have this opportunity to share some of our work and some of our thinking around, defining tactical urbanism and what it is and how it can help various cities. Um, so street plans, we were just briefly introduced, so I won't spend much time on that, but our work is pretty varied. We work a lot in transportation planning, public spaces, urban policy development, and a lot of research and advocacy work. And we see tactical urbanism as a approach, as a project delivery methodology that helps us reach more people and deliver better projects as we work with various clients around the world. Our goals today, I want you to become familiar with tactical urbanism as a project delivery methodology or tool. I want you to be able to understand the benefits associated with the tactical approach and look forward to showing you some new policies and programs that are starting to enable city and citizen collaboration here in a few places in the United States, which is exciting. In short, the origin of this work, for at least me personally, was being frustrated with the way that planning and design happens, at least in North America, which is we see opportunity, we see problems, we want to respond to those problems, we might create a new solution, and we come up with a beautiful picture. This is what it could be. It could be a map, it could be a diagram, it could be a rendering such as this. This happens to be the Upper West Side here in New York. But the really big challenge is that showing people that change is possible on the screen, on a map, that's really easy. The hard part is actually getting this to happen on the ground because people tend to not want change. People have lots of different opinions, and oftentimes the arguments and concerns that people have are articulated in isolation from reality. In terms of theoretically what might happen versus what actually does happen on the ground. And this may be why a majority of plans don't get implemented. And that's frustrating for us as planners, designers, architects, maybe landscape architects, but it's even more concerning if those plans are helping to deal with some really large problems like affordable housing, safer streets and mobility, global climate change, issues such as that. We need to have more success. And I think part of the problem is with planning and its general approaches is that the focus has always been largely on delivering the long-term project, curb, concrete, permanent infrastructure that'll last 50 to 100 years, if not longer. And to deliver those projects can be very complicated politically, can be very expensive, and it's certainly very time-consuming. And so this great quote from Jane Jacobs is one that I like to draw upon a lot, which is that city planning lacks tactics for building cities that work like cities. And what I think she means by that is if you think about some of the more dynamic, equitable places in cities around the world, they tend to be made by many, many hands over many generations, right? Little moves, little projects, little additions that transform a place over time. And we don't really have a lot of methodologies for doing that together in our cities any longer. As we've professionalized the planning and design field, it's more about professionals enacting their vision and less about many hands making the city and the neighborhoods better. So what is tactical urbanism then? The definition in the dictionary is small-scale actions that serve a larger purpose. And as we were observing the rise of this movement and the application of this approach, it was all about little things, low cost, quick, oftentimes temporary projects that were indeed creating longer-term change. And so we've defined this idea as an approach that can be led by cities with lots of partners, by organizations with their partners, and or just by citizens who use these short-term and low-cost projects very intentionally to catalyze long-term change. And so that's a really important point that I want to underscore, and that's why it appears in orange, which is the intent. Even if you're working for one day or one afternoon, it's really critical that you're connecting your work to something in terms of where you want to see a public space go in the future, a street, or perhaps a piece of land. You're always trying to steward and think about the long term and connecting your action on the ground to a long-term vision. So we've written about this at Street Plans and with lots of partners for a while now. We had our first guide come out in 2011. We published that guide, thought maybe a few people would read it, and it turns out that thousands and thousands and thousands of people have read it, including the various iterations that have been developed since. And so you can see from 2011 to 2014, we wrote these free guides, including one with a partner in South America, Citywide, as well as co-design in Australia and New Zealand. And like a tactical urbanism project that's iterative, those 4 booklets kind of fed into us both practicing the idea and learning about the idea through our practice and others' practice, and it culminated in our full-length book published by Lydon Press in 2015. Most recently, we've released a free guide, which you can download at tacticalurbanismguide.com, along with all the other guides, which is all about materials and design. And I'll get into some of the elements of that in a little bit. And then finally, and just earlier this year, we published a version in Italy. And you can see from this map, in terms of people who have read or come across these publications and this idea, it's a global movement. And I think those of you on the webinar today, I saw the list of attendees and the different countries many of you are from, and this is an idea that has spread, and that's really, really exciting. In short, I think it's about putting the making in placemaking, right? This is about doing. It's very open. It's very democratic. It's about inviting people in to make changes in their neighborhoods in a very collaborative sense. And making that change accessible is really, really important, I think, to the future of our cities. So we see this as, again, it's something to be top-down or bottom-up, and certainly everything in between. In fact, those projects that include all sorts of different people in terms of their backgrounds and their professional roles, their jobs, and their capacities makes for a better project in the end. Much like Jane Jacobs says, we need many hands. We need these tactics to make our cities work like cities. And the iterative approach is probably best defined by the project that is known globally in Times Square, which is led by the Business Improvement District and the New York City Department of Transportation, which they started with a vision to close down 5 or 6 blocks to motor vehicles from the beginning, and showed a picture of it. You would have seen the pitchforks and the fire, just like I showed you a few slides ago. Instead, it was about lawn chairs for a weekend, seeing how that was received by the public. Of course, highly reversible. When that was a success, you saw the paint and the pot plants and the tables and chairs go out, very, very low cost again, but helping to understand what is working in the space. How is traffic flowing around this? Are more people walking? Are more people sitting? Like really learning how people use the space. And that's really kind of the back-end methodology to tactical urbanism. And we see it all over New York now. We see it all over many cities. Here's just another neighborhood in Williamsburg. This is a temporary plaza, which I biked by with a colleague from Australia about a week and a half ago, and I saw this sign that it's just another plaza like Times Square that's going through this iterative approach and will be made permanent in the very near future. So we look at this process as one that's actually quite simple. You build a prototype, you build a pilot project, you measure the impact, you learn from what works, and more importantly, what doesn't work, and you move forward. So we see that this approach encourages people to work together in new ways. It's not very common that city and citizens would go out collectively and work on projects together. It's a great equalizer, across neighborhoods and across the city. It allows people to experience a different reality. That's really, really critical. It can alleviate a lot of fear and concern of change by people just seeing on the ground that maybe that proposal isn't as scary as one thought. Because we're designing oftentimes and building projects in public spaces, we can widen public engagement by bringing concepts and new ideas to where people already are in their daily lives, as opposed to asking them to come to a public meeting. We can very specifically and intentionally test aspects of a policy, a program, or a plan, and see what's working in those policies or plans before they're fully adopted and scaled citywide. So it allows us to work out the bugs in the system, so to speak. And then finally, this approach allows us to deliver public benefits faster. When you implement a placeholder project, something that's maybe only meant for a year or two, you're also learning what doesn't work, but you're also accruing those benefits and gaining value out of that temporary project. Or, as I like to show in these presentations, in short, this really helps us understand and take care of the fact that us as planners and designers can't figure out everything all at once and just build something that's going to work perfectly. That people will always use spaces differently, and we have to think much more about finding methodologies that help us uncover, what people want in a space rather than just what we think is needed in a space through design. So I'll give you a couple of examples, and I'll start with a project in Miami. And these projects I want to share with you are iterative. They are evolving. They are in process. And I think you'll get that sense pretty quickly. So back in 2011, as we started to write about and practice tactical urbanism at street plans, we got very excited about Parking Day. I'm sure a lot of you on this webinar are very aware of Parking Day. And the idea was we take over a couple parking spaces and make a mini park. And a colleague of ours in Miami, Ralph Rosado, he approached us and said, look, this is really great and this is fun, but there's a huge problem just around the corner that's a much bigger problem that you should probably try to solve. And that was Biscayne Boulevard, which has these 6 medians in the middle of an 8-lane surface highway that's used for parking, and it really disconnects downtown Miami from Bayfront Park. And so if you've ever been to Miami, you've probably experienced that. So being challenged by Ralph, being excited about scaling up the work, in 2012 we got a grant, and along with Ralph, who's also an urban planner, decided to take over one of these 6 parking lot medians with this project. And so we call this a rendering in real time, and it was a week-long installation that was very much meant to showcase what was possible in the space and to take some of the ideas that had been put in previous plans and make them real for people, make them excited about them. The people who live and work in the downtown experience a new public space. And we learned a lot over the course of that week. We partnered with dozens of organizations to help program the space and bring people into the space. Got a lot of positive feedback, and the success of that helped inspire the Downtown Development Authority to create a more detailed plan around, well, what would actually work from a more technical perspective? What would some of the concept drawings be? And you can see here a much changed snapshot of what that street could look like, from 8 lanes down to 4, and a lot more spaces for people for walking and cycling. Fast forward to 2015, we were able to secure a grant alongside the Downtown Development Authority and a few other partners, and came up with the project to evolve it into Biscayne Green, which would be a 1-month trial. So from a 1-week trial now to a 1-month trial of 3 different spaces and how they could be improved, 3 different medians and how they could be improved. And so we worked with volunteers over 4.5 days to actually build this project out by hand. There's one of the medians in terms of what it looked like afterwards. We were able to add on-street parking, bring in a temporary city bike station, put in a bus and bike lane on the street, so really slow down those big wide traffic lanes. We found people using the space in particular ways during the day, and then found that through the programming and the big events at night, we actually were able to draw a huge crowd. And this was really critical to inviting people into the public space and having them experience this and give us a sense of what kinds of programs and opportunities in terms of design elements would work in this space in terms of long-term design. And so over the 23 days that the project was open and available for use, not counting the setup and the takedown, we were able to understand through a lot of evaluation that we reached 20,000 plus people. We learned about what kind of users were in the space, the peak times, the age of people, how they were feeling in the space. And through collecting all that data, we learned a ton that is being fed now into the prospect of a long-term infrastructure redesign for not just 1, but all 6 of those spaces along the boulevard. And what's almost more powerful about these projects than setting them up is actually taking them down and removing them. The loss of that space after people started to get used to it was very, very powerful in convincing people that now that the project was gone, that the city really needed to invest in that space. And that's exactly what this politician on the left is saying, who's maybe skeptical of the project at first, came around very quickly once he saw how active and used the space was and how possible it was to transform that. And so the commissioner here said that he would like to make sure that this space is made permanent within his term of office. And we're now kind of entering that 3rd iteration, right? So build, measure, learn. You go through a couple of different iterative processes. Now we're thinking about the 3rd one and how it absolutely gets made into a permanent public space. Case study number 2, this is a much smaller city in the northeast of the United States called Burlington. Some of you might know Burlington from being the home of Bernie Sanders, the famous U.S. politician. It's a small college city. It's about 40,000 people, but it's very, very walkable. It's very active. It's a very, very exciting place to work, and that's exactly what we did there over the last few years. Is we worked on developing a bicycle and pedestrian master plan, which is the city's first. And what we saw was actually for the U.S., a lot of people are already walking and cycling. Over 20%, actually over 25% of people are already doing so. But we wanted to see that number increase dramatically. So we wanted to double cycling, increase walking, and bring driving trips down to about only 1/3 of those trips taken in the city. And so we plan to do that with a really aggressive bikeway network that included a grid of protected bikeways, which is what you see in blue, and then pathways that you see in green. But even in a place that's really progressive like Burlington, it's going to be really challenging to take that space back from motor vehicles and give it over to people for cycling and for walking. And that became evident as we started our project back in 2015. Just as we started, a woman named Peggy O'Neill actually proposed to the city that she wanted to do a one-day, pop-up demonstration of a protected bike lane to help get her kids and their friends from their neighborhood to the school safely. And the city of Burlington, to their credit, said, look, that's a really great idea. That's consistent with where we want to go in our plan that we just started. But unfortunately, we have to say no. And we have to say no because we have no way to say yes. We have no policy. We have no program. We have no way to consider the liability concerns for you as citizens setting up this project. So while we love the idea, stay tuned. And we'll hopefully build that infrastructure through the master plan. And that was a moment where we said, look, this is a great opportunity to leverage what people want to do in their neighborhood to make it safer. And for one day to try that out, that's extremely low risk and very low cost. And so we proposed to the city, and they were very receptive about developing an actual process where citizens could go out and do their own projects in streets and public spaces. They could build their projects for up to 7 days. The city would be a partner in permitting that to happen, and the concerns about safety and liability and materials and outcomes and communication around the project could all be codified in a clear, simple approach. And that's how we developed the community-led demonstration project policy guide, which I believe is maybe the first in the country, if not the world, to really actively permit and structure tactical urbanism that just allows citizens to go out and do their own projects. And of course, there are things like clear design criteria, and we created usable tools for citizens to help communicate their project and the intent. But we had never done this with a client or with a city before. We had been wanting to. And so we were not 100% confident that what we put together as a policy would be 100% effective. And so we wanted to actually test out our own policy as well as do general engagement for the population of people in the city around the master plan that we had begun. So we, over the course of a weekend, tested out a range of infrastructure changes that we were already starting to consider as part of the master plan. So this is back in September of 2015, a few months after Peggy O'Neill had been told, no, you can't build your pop-up bikeway. And so we partnered with a big event called Art Hop, where there was 10,000 people who came out. So we were able to bring these ideas and the overall approach of the master plan to that demographic of people. We were able to do a series of protected bike lanes, which the city did not have any built at that time, and very cheaply and very quickly transformed streets that linked people from neighborhoods into, they have a ciclovia, or what we call open streets in North America, where they closed down about 2.5 miles of streets for people to walk and bike. So we made sure that these protected bikeways actually linked into that car-free network, so people had a safe way to get to and from the route. And by doing this on a number of different streets, we were able to see how different infrastructure would perform. We were able to work with these volunteers to improve intersections, and then, of course, reach thousands of people over the course of the day while this was set up. And, of course, one of the great things about these projects is, from a technical perspective, It allows us to test how things like emergency response would occur when street changes are made, which is oftentimes a very big challenge here in the US and in North America, is that the concerns over emergency responders and their access to property and their ability to get to a fire or an emergency quickly is always a big deal. So we were able to work with the fire department and show them the design and get their feedback. We worked with this mailman who was very upset when he did not understand why the street was redesigned the way that it was. But we were able to speak with him in detail about why we were doing it, and he was able to learn, oh, this could actually make it easier for me to do my job because I'm also a pedestrian half the day as I deliver the mail, and I also have concerns about the safety of myself driving and people cycling, who I see out here a lot. And so over those 2 days, we learned quite a bit. We learned about speeds on the street, that adding this infrastructure allowed the same number of cars to move through these spaces, but we did not actually have the high rate of speeding that was happening before. So we were able to bring the speeds down, speeding vehicles down to about 6% and 25%. So that was a nice impact. Through the survey that our partnering organization, Locomotion, set up, we were able to realize where else in the city people wanted to see this type of infrastructure, which is a great guide for us as planners who are working on the plan itself. We were able to take a really close look at those priority streets through these responses. And the city learned that the infrastructure that the volunteers had built was very viable, but they could make those changes very quickly. So within a couple of weeks, what you see on the left side of the screen there, that's no longer volunteers in the street. That's the Department of Public Works for the city implementing the infrastructure upgrades and the paint that the volunteers had put in temporarily previously before. And the city had also adopted a pilot process. So now they were working on these demonstration projects, and they adopted a pilot for a year-long project. And this is all while we're still continuing to plan. So they're building infrastructure as we're planning, which is really exciting. And they were testing 2 different barrier types on this roadway, which is relatively high speed and used to be 4 lanes of traffic, and we brought it down to 2 by implementing these protected bike lanes. And then moving forward, the city has since taken that demonstration policy and process and worked with volunteers and other planning firms and organizations to build out changes to dangerous or confusing intersections. And so it's been really great to see the city move forward and use all this guidance that they've developed for the city and for the citizens. And then finally, what the NGO sector learned, our partner at Locomotion, now that the city was investing in these temporary projects and had a process in which they could lead the implementation of this type of work, they could then invest in things like a pop-up trailer. And so they asked us to help them design this trailer that would be full of materials so they could drive this around to various places in Burlington and around the whole state of Vermont to support projects to test out various ideas to make walking and cycling safer and easier, and to communicate to people there's lots of opportunities to deliver long-term change. And finally, in terms of the story where this started with Peggy, she was featured in a national public radio story about her advocacy and how the city responded very proactively to her initial request, which was to build a 1-day bike lane. And so it's really, really important, I think, if there's people on this webinar who work at cities, it's really important for city leaders to be responsive to their citizens, to be able to find ways to collaborate and build trust, and at the same time build political support and will for things like longer-term master plans. And that's exactly what's been happening in Burlington. And so the next step of this work, as we're going into more iterations, is that we've since completed the master plan. It's been adopted by the city, and we've continued to work with the city of Burlington and their Department of Public Works to build what we're calling the Quick Build program. And this is all about projects that can be implemented at a low cost, but can last for, say, 1 to 5 years. And the idea is that we are looking at some of the more dangerous streets and intersections, which we identified through the master planning process, and developing the infrastructure and the materials and giving them the guidance they need to implement these temporary projects, which they've already started to do. And so this is back on one of the same streets that we worked on initially as a demonstration project. This is now the interim design project where they are going to be protecting this street for the next several years using still relatively low-cost materials, but which make cycling safer for people in the city. We're actively doing and pursuing in street plans is we're trying to retool cities to be able to not just think about long-term infrastructure and long-term plans, but give them the tools and the resources, the policies, the guidance to allow for demonstration projects, which are, very much can be led by citizen groups or nonprofits and NGOs, develop the material guidance, the processes for that, how this can be done effectively. Pilot projects, which might be 1 month to 1 year, which allows for much more robust time to evaluate a project, both its successes and its failures. We see demonstrations as a great engagement tool. We see pilots as a great way to collect data and really study and learn what's working and what's not. These projects are oftentimes led by cities. They include materials that might be a little bit more robust. And then what happens when you have a successful pilot, but you may not have the resources at the city to invest in permanent infrastructure immediately? Well, there's a gap of time typically that's 1, 5, maybe 10 years where you're going to still want to have that benefit of the project and something that's a little bit more beautiful and a little bit more permanent, but is still flexible. And so interim design really accounts for that gap period between a pilot and a long-term project. And so we've really developed a lot of tools and materials at this time interval that allows for projects to continue to evolve over time. So I'm going to move relatively quickly here. It's been about 25 minutes, so I don't have that much time left. But we do have this much bigger question, right, of dealing with the 21st century. And I think here in the U.S. this fall, we've seen hurricanes, we've seen wildfires, we've seen massive earthquakes in Mexico. Whether it's man-made and/or natural, the 21st century is full of lots of different challenges. And in terms of how tactical urbanism deals with resilience is a question that we've been asking and working on and developing with the Rockefeller Foundation through their 100 Resilient Cities program. And so some of you may know they're working with cities around the globe to identify what their resilience challenges are and what the priorities should be for these cities in terms of making these places more resilient and sustainable for the long term. And so I'll give you one quick example of how we're trying to build resilience, and from a physical standpoint, yes, but also a social standpoint in a city called Thessaloniki, Greece. And this is a city that has a huge amount of beauty and incredible history, but like other places in Greece has really suffered from a lack of trust between citizens and their government. And there's also a new wave, a new energy, a new sense of advocacy for neighborhoods and people and public spaces. People are wanting to start projects and work amongst working collaboratively amongst themselves to improve their neighborhoods. And that's actually very challenging to do, not only in Thessaloniki but in most cities. So it's no surprise that one of the key goals in the Resilient Thessaloniki strategy was to find ways to help people co-create an inclusive city, and largely through the availability of public spaces. So we got engaged with that city this year back in April, and we ran a couple of different workshops, and we wanted to focus on a wide range of public spaces with the intent that we would create a policy and a guide similar to kind of what we did in Burlington, Vermont, that would allow citizens to take the lead on improving a wide variety of types of spaces. So we held these workshops with both the city, and then we held workshops with business owners and residents and city advocates, and had those folks come together, and we're able to uncover that really what people need is a real centralized resource that allowed people to develop models and develop processes to improve public space. But they also need a very quick and easy process to do so. So it wasn't complicated and challenging. It wouldn't take months and months and months to implement a public space project. So we have since drafted the public space co-creation program. We've focused this work in the short term on not all those initial spaces, but on parks and squares and on streets. And what we've really been working through in collaboration with the city and with the Resilience Office in Thessaloniki is how do we collaborate? What are the roles between the community members and government? What role do city agencies play in this process? And so we are, like in Burlington, pilot testing a project that will utilize the process and the policy that we've developed as a draft next month, in just a few weeks now, actually. And so once they try this out, and they try it out in the neighborhood, we will see what works and what doesn't, and we will edit and change our draft and respond to those needs, and then the city will adopt that in the coming months and then make that available to neighborhoods across the entire city. So we're starting with one neighborhood, and then we'll roll that out once we have a little bit more confidence and feedback from how that process goes. If you want to read about resilience, I want to make a quick plug for a book that was just published this week, which is a community resilience reader. It was edited by Daniel Lurch of the Post-Carbon Institute, and I was fortunate enough to be able to write a chapter in that book about how resilience works with tactical urbanism, what we're calling tactical resilience. So we've learned a couple of things in this work, city departments, advocacy groups, businesses. People are really hungry for a new approach on how projects are delivered. People want things that are more collaborative, that are more attainable and accessible, that are lower cost, projects that are easier to do. But to do all that, cities and citizens need policies, they need programs, they need design, stewardship, and materials guidance to enable these projects to happen. So that's one thing we've been working on, is the material kit of parts. I'm going to move now, guys, really quickly. I'm sorry, but just in terms of training people and getting materiality and design working, that was sort of the whole process behind our materials and design guide. So you can download this guide and get the technical guidance that's in there. This is sourced from more than 50 different people from cities around North America. We've got these palette of materials that look at barrier elements for safety, landscaping, surface treatments, signs, street furniture, and programming. And just give you a sense of what that guide looks like on the inside. We have a whole criteria on how we select different material types. And then we run people through from a informal demonstration, really low cost kind of materiality and the kinds of projects that are appropriate for, through to more formal and more longer lasting materials that can last, from that demonstration pilot phase up to pilots and interim design, for 5 years or possibly even longer. So if you want this kind of information, you can certainly go to that website and download the materials yourself and mix and match and see what might work for your project. And if you have materials that are not in the guide, we'll be looking to actually release a second version of this relatively soon that will add even more materials, which we've been using and others have been using on various projects. And again, like in Burlington, like in Thessaloniki, the point of this guide is to help cities actually adopt and embed tactical urbanism in their work. And so out of that grant to produce the guide, we were able to work with 6 different cities, which you see here, and then implement a workshop that was absolutely about training city leaders and citizens at the same time on how to use the materials to actually make the kinds of projects that they want happen. And so in Fayetteville, Arkansas, which is in a small university city, they started with one project as a collaboration with volunteers. They built a little mini roundabout, and they studied that for about 6 weeks. They found what worked well in that process and decided to develop their guide for tactical projects. So they have a permitting process and an application process that allows these projects to be happening once citizens fill out that application and get permission. And again, this is moving the concept from a plan or a design from paper to the hands of people, and then right into the pavement, as we like to say. And so they've done a number of projects just this fall since they've adopted that policy, where these are just projects that people want to get done in their neighborhoods, and there's a way for citizens to get permission to do that. And they're seeing longer-term success now take root with some of these one-day projects turning into long-term projects. So I will conclude with this, really these 9 lessons, which are that tactical urbanism can be how your city and how your citizens, think about delivering projects. It can be your project delivery process. Through this process, you can test existing plans that are underway, like we did in Lydon, or you can take even proposed projects and plans and go out there and test them as well. In doing so, you open up the project delivery process to a lot more people, many different types of partners, the kinds of people that may not typically be involved in city planning. You can find events like Art Hop or Open Streets, like that example in Burlington, and take advantage of those initiatives that are already ongoing, where people are already congregating. So you can find multiplier benefits in doing your projects. We want to reach more and more people, get more and more feedback. That's how we do, design and deliver better projects for the long term. Think about scaling down before you scale up. Starting at a street corner, a small project for one day, get used to the idea of working with materials, understand the process or the frustrations that are involved with delivering these projects, And you'll learn a lot from that just doing this once or twice. And then once you understand how these projects are done, you can gain more confidence and more skill and work on bigger projects and more ambitious projects for longer term transformation. But all that said, tactical urbanism is not a solution to all urban problems. It's a tool, it's an approach that's appropriate for certain kinds of projects at a certain kind of scale. This will not solve, affordable housing crises, will not build out, new transport systems across your whole city. There are really big initiatives that tactical urbanism cannot necessarily tackle. Not everything should be permanent. A lot of times, temporary or interim can be good enough for a very long time. For example, there's a very temporary interim plaza in front of our office here in Brooklyn that's been that way for almost 11 years. So these things can last as long as they're maintained and there's some stewardship. Cities and citizens will actually need programs and funding and mechanisms to scale tactical urbanism up citywide, and so that's a real need and something you might want to be working towards in your city to help make this approach more impactful beyond one project or one neighborhood. And finally, no copy-paste urbanism. I think it's so easy to get inspired, but also so easy just to see what another city did and try to copy that and bring that into your neighborhood. And I think it's really important to be critical about how you apply these projects, how you work with people who already live and work in neighborhoods, and find solutions and responses that are catered to those places. So really think critically on how you can adapt and evolve some of these projects that you see and make them work for you and your community. And you can pretty much get away with anything if you wear a yellow vest, as we've learned. So with that, I'll say thank you, and I think we've got some time we've got about 20 minutes for some conversation, perhaps sharing of ideas and other projects as well. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Mike. That was really an impressive and great presentation with a number of content, and I think I have personally learned a lot, and I'm already observing for quite a while the questions panel here, and we have a number of questions already running in, and I will do a little bit, or I will do my best to bundle them a little bit. So the last three ones I got, they go pretty much in the same direction. So on the first hand, we have a feedback from Adane Lemma from Addis Abeba, and she's asking about how you can implement tactical urbanization at limited right-of-way, which might be understand also in a way that you don't have the support by traffic regulations, you don't have the support of the government. And in the same direction, the questions of Isabel Oliveira is going, and she's asking, how can we bring a project to life without government support? In my city, the city hall president is very much interested in parking lots, using empty spaces for supermarkets and destroying green space. And adding up on that, there is also this a similar question from Johnny Ramirez. Hello, thanks for this great webinar. I was wondering if there are any helpful tips of how to start implementing tactical urbanism when there is no interest or support from the authorities and the legal framework is really rigid enough to seriously limit the possibility for citizens to be engaged and test proposals. So he would, all the three, I think, would really love to get some tips how to start with small initiatives despite of rather opposition from the authorities.
Sure. Thank you for those questions. Those are all very good ones, and I will try to answer them to the best of my ability quickly. So fortunately, many successful tactical urbanism projects and initiatives that have then gone on to gain city support have begun without city support or city. That's a risky proposition to take in terms of going out and developing and delivering a project without the city's involvement or permission. But I think if you are very considerate and thoughtful and tactical in your approach, you may have the opportunity to showcase and move the opinion of the politicians and city leaders. And so a couple examples. One would be that you could find an existing project or an existing policy that has been sanctioned by the city, and you can take a project that you've developed to basically in the spirit of that policy or that's already been identified and maybe even approved on paper in a plan, and find a way to prototype that at a very small and inexpensive scale. So you might be able to find low-cost materials, you might be able to borrow materials from from a hardware or lumber store, or from a business, or from family members, to go and make a change to a street and document it and explain how this project that you are doing is very much connected to a city policy or an initiative, that is already sanctioned. By doing that project and then being present while that project is there, and being okay with accepting some of the risk that is associated with that, you may be able to interact with a lot of your neighbors, a lot of your colleagues, friends, and family, and get feedback on that. If it tends to be positive, you might be surprised how quickly, through word of mouth, through social media, through people calling the city and supporting it, you might get a politician or city leader who says, oh wow, I'm actually going to look really good to my constituency if I actually appear to be in support of this project, because there's a lot of people who are actually in favor of this, and it's a good thing for me to also champion the work. So finding that is a really finding that project, that opportunity, is something I would encourage you to do. Another way to think about this is taking an existing city permit or something that you're already allowed to, and interpreting it a little bit differently. So our great friend and colleagues Jason Roberts and Andrew Howard and their crew down in Dallas, Texas, when they first started the Better Block project, which is one of the more well-known tactical initiatives, they were basically connecting their project, what they wanted to do, to an art fair, an art event, which already happened in their neighborhood. So like in Burlington, or like where there's already an initiative, they said, look, there's already an art fair happening. There's going to be lots of people who come out to the neighborhood for this. Let's take the city's permit process to close down a street for a block party, and let's tweak that. And so we will close down the street, but instead of keeping the street closed, we're actually going to set up a project that would change the street, make it a lot safer, make there be more public spaces. We're going to support businesses by doing that. And through that project, they actually opened the street back up once the materials were in the ground. And so while the city expected there to be no traffic flowing through, they opened it to traffic to showcase how the street could work with this new design. So they didn't necessarily fully break the law. They just changed how they applied the permit they received through a sanctioned process. And the outcome of that has not only been a global impact, but in Dallas, the feedback and support from a political perspective was really, really big. They changed some zoning regulations in the neighborhood. They asked that team of people to do a similar kind of project in other areas around the city, and the proponents of that work have gone on to do that kind of initiative all over the globe. So those are a couple answers, just to think really strategically and tactically about how you can work with the regulations that you already have, or the events that are ongoing, or the policies and plans that are in place, and make them real, make them come alive. And if you're willing to take that risk, you might see some really good outcomes.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mike, for your tips on that. I think that's really practical and will hopefully be helpful to the guys who have asked those questions. We had one early on in the presentation, and I thought it was actually partially answered because you referred to the example in Thessaloniki on the work on resilient cities. But Martin Wysocki had actually, in the light of the latest weather events in Northern America and also in the Caribbean, had actually a question whether you could tackle stormwater management by any kind of tactical urbanism projects. So do you have any project reference or anything physical that you could share? So how to deal with those questions?
Yes, unfortunately I couldn't put in the wide range of project examples in which we've applied this, but also with 100 Resilient Cities. So that same program we've been working with in Greece, we've worked in a city called Norfolk, Virginia. And Norfolk is a very historic city that is largely built on landfill. So they filled in a lot of creeks and waterways over many hundreds of years to build out more of the city. And as the water is rising and as we have more frequent and more intense rain events, they're experiencing a lot more flooding in their historic neighborhoods and in the downtown center of the city. And so we worked with Rockefeller. We worked with 3 different neighborhoods and the city itself to take their resilience strategy, which is very much focused on dealing with some of the flooding challenges, particularly from rainwater. And we taught people who came to our workshop about all the different small-scale, parcel-level rainwater retention strategies that are available. So from blue roofs and green roofs to rain gardens to rain barrels. And we walked them through the processes to, well, basically the opportunity to build these into their own parcels of land or in their neighborhood streets. And we took people from the classroom out into an alleyway. We to the fire department and got them up on the roof of the building, and we blasted water down through one of the drain pipes, and then we calculated how quickly the simulated rainwater would go from the roof through the drain pipe onto the asphalt and then down to the drainage system down the alleyway. And then we worked with the volunteers to build out 4 different rain barrels that we hooked up to 4 different buildings in the alleyway. We had de-paved part of the sidewalk to make more green space to retain stormwater, and we made also a rain garden as well. And so over the course of that day, we were then able to measure the speed at which water could be retained and how much water could be retained just by installing 4 simple rain barrel interventions on property. And the idea was that if 1 rain barrel, 4 rain barrels, 40 rain barrels may not actually make that big of a difference, but 400, 4,000, 40,000 across the whole city would have to start to slow the rate of rainwater flooding, right? So the idea is that small-scale actions and small projects over time will add up to longer-term transformation, and that the city itself can't afford to build out the infrastructure themselves all at once. It's going to take a collaboration between the city and citizens. And what has happened after that workshop is that we recommended that the city kind of adopt their own palette of project interventions that they would allow citizens to do with support of the city, and to also put funding into those projects so that citizens themselves would be able to afford to build these types of interventions. Even if there's just a few $100s, what we learned in our workshop as we surveyed everybody was that the cost of doing these projects was probably going to be the biggest barrier to people doing them. So we recommended to the city, look, set aside money and give out these micro grants to citizens to actually be able to lead the implementation of this type of stormwater infrastructure. So I could go on about that project, but that's one way we've responded to that challenge, and it's really only been about a year and 4 months since we held the initial workshop. So it'll take some time to see how successful that program is and how much infrastructure gets built over time with citizens in the lead. But it's definitely a big opportunity, right, in terms of thinking small first and how we would scale up that kind of infrastructure citywide.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Mike. And we have a small critical, or not really critical question, but Amit Aurora is asking if you have any thoughts or any experience with traffic crashes or liability issues while a project on tactical urbanism is ongoing, like either in a pilot or interim phase. So did you?
Yes. Thank you for that question. It's a good one. On projects that I've worked on, no, we've never had anybody get hurt. And we've been doing these projects now for about 5 years, 6 years really. So that's really great. I think partially why that is as planners, we're pretty aware of the types of geometry that is safe, so that will slow down cars and make people go more slowly. When these projects are into a street, they're oftentimes they create a really big visual change. So people driving tend to slow down anyways, just because they're approaching something that they weren't expecting or they haven't seen before, so they become instantly more cautious. So I think that's part of the reason, and that slows them down. And so with slow speeds, there tends to be less of a risk in terms of traffic crashes or people being hit by people driving, people walking being hit by people driving. We did have a colleague and a good friend of mine who did a project about a year and a half ago, and there was a small fender bender between a truck who ran into one of the materials that was in the street. So when we do things, we try to have an edge, a barrier that is, at least at first, can be flexible or can be driven over or whatnot, and not cause a real serious damage to a vehicle or ideally to a person. So it's some of the ways we think about, at least for 1 or 2 days, how we deal with that issue. And then just to end on that, and this is kind of me more of my advocacy hat, and less as my consultant hat, but as an advocate for safer cities, we get a lot of questions and pushback from cities about the safety of these projects. And I've literally heard of nobody being injured or hurt. I know of only one tiny little crash, little fender bender that's happened as a result of these projects. Yet the geometry and the street design and the things that's a status quo in our cities leads to, in our country, it leads to about 37,000 fatalities a year, let alone hundreds of thousands, if not millions of injuries with people driving, walking, and cycling along our streets. And so point being that thinking about how to deliver safer streets is all about design in terms of geometry and creating that geometry, and that's always what we're intending to do, is create places that are a lot more accessible and safe in the long run. And so hopefully, in the future we won't have anybody be hurt, and I'm pretty proud of the fact that it's has not happened yet, and hopefully it never does.
Yes, thank you, Mike, very much. We have actually a lot of exciting questions in the list, and I will actually try to share them with you, and eventually we can follow this up individually with some of the participants, or even share some of your answers. We will discuss that later on. I've just got a message from Luz Yasmin that she is actually here with us, and that she would be ready to give a short input on what they were doing in Mexico. So I will now try to set this quickly up, and everybody who doesn't have the time to stay with us, thanks very much for participating. We will share the recording as well as the presentation with everybody after the webinar, and I think I have almost everything ready. The software is playing a little bit trick with me, so I hope to find that. So I can't unmute Luz at the moment. So attendees muted. So now we have. So Lynn, do you have? Are you with us here? Oh, sorry, that's here. Luz, are you with us here, Yasmin? Luz, Yasmin? I think you would have, if you want. We have here some information from Luz Yasmin from Mexico. So in case she can't tell this personally to us, here we have several of information that she has compiled, a small video. They have created also a guide on technical urbanism in Spanish language, and they have also some. You have the activities, you can watch them on Facebook. Also, we have compiled here a few further materials from Mike, some video resources, as well as links to the materials that he and Street Plans have developed. So thanks everybody so far. We have also, as you know, we have 2 nice posters which are now available in 20 languages. This is the one on the 10 principles for sustainable urban transport, and we have also a A0 poster on road safety, which you can print out or in a number of languages. This is a few further sources from what we're doing at GIZ in the field of transport and mobility. And yeah, I hope you liked this webinar so far. And I'm still trying to manage to get Luz Yasmin speaking with us, but if you have to go and you close this webinar session, so please, we would highly appreciate if you could give us a short feedback. So if you close the software, it should automatically open a short feedback form in the browser. So thanks again, Mike.
Thank you.
So far, and yeah, we'll follow up with you on some of the questions.
Sounds good. Thank you, everybody.
Bueno.
Hi, Luz.
Yes, I am.
We get you actually online. So,
great.
unfortunately, we lost some of the attendees already, but we still have about 45 people in the line. So, for those who are interested, please stay with us. We got it now running, and I would, So Luz, you just have the word. So, what did you do in Mexico?
Thank you very much, Matthias and Mike, for the opportunity to present this. We were part of the road safety strategy with AXA Life Insurance and ITDP Mexico. With Camina, we represent this new infrastructure with voluntaries of AXA. So after we do some another interventions with neighborhoods, they call us to put this kind of infrastructure in representing the topic of the infrastructure there in Benito Juárez, la delegación Benito Juárez, and well, we are participating with them in this strategy in part of infrastructure and trying to communicate better this kind of new typologies or redesigns in the street. So the stencils that you can look there, they represent like the floor of like a grandmother's house here in Mexico. You know, it's for us we want to represent this kind of things in the people who walk over there, to feel safe, like they were in common. So that was our last practice in Mexico City, and as part of the with this acknowledgement, I am participating like a consultant in a design street manual for the national government in Mexico. So we put this process in one chapter of the manual to, we call it Tactical Urbanism, and for these new designs, because many of the governments, local governments, wants to apply these things, but they don't know how. Yes. So we developed too. Yes, the slide that is now in the computer, you can see we develop a tactical urbanism manual for neighborhoods, because every time that someone calls us to do an intervention, they ask about how many cones they need, no? So we try to understand how the people in their head trying to understand the territory of the street, or what represent that kind of stuff that you put in the street. So in the manual we incentivize people to use whatever they have in their home or in their streets, like guacales, we have like some boxes there of wood or chairs, or but well, we represent it in a cubeta. So it's very great because the people have accepted that. And it's the kit, the Camina kit, we branded like that. The Camina kit is the kit that you can use wherever you are in Mexico, for example. So yeah, well, we represented by a bucket. So yes, is we try to transform the image about this object, and incentivize people to do it with them, but no to put this kind of objects to look for a car space. You can use it to look for your space in the street. So this, yes, this knowledge is on the internet in our page, that is www.arisacamina.mx, and you can download this manual, and you can see our video too, because it's they step by step we start to explain in 6 steps how you can transform your streets, your neighborhood, with your neighbors. So one of the things that Mike said is very important, that you do it with whatever you have, but you can organize with your neighborhoods too, and try to ask to the city to modify and redesign the street of your neighbor. Yes, but if you have this proposal, yes, if you have this proposal that we can check, if as Camina, maybe you can be more proactive to implement that design there. Then.
Yes,
so,
thank you, Luz Yasmin. That is really a great example for Mexico, and I think it's a really good like final word. So that I hope that everybody gets out from your experience and from Mike's presentation a lot of practical inputs, and now is motivated to also go out to join up with their neighbors or other organizations and just try out new things. Luz, actually there is a little question to you, also from Adanif Lema from Addis Ababa, and the question is whether you had during this project whether you had any kind of challenges or obstacles, for example with the authorities or with drivers or anything. Did you have some not so positive experience?
Yes, well, in every time we are prepared to this kind of experience. We have a word for that in the team that calls, like, we do a map, like a map of punches. You know, it's like where every time you have this, like a how do you say, hits in the project, you know. But if you know how to manage them, you can control a little bit how the security of the people there, and how to manage some neighbors that doesn't want the intervention, and always we speak before to the authority and ask for help, or ask just to inform them what we'll be doing there. So yes, we developed a map in these areas, no? Because for example, we know that they will be hit by the neighbors that don't want the intervention, or the neighbor that don't want to move their car, or something like that, or someone who is like a pedestrian that don't understand whatever we were doing there. So we do a list, and then we select someone that represents us in the intervention. And for example, me, I am the I don't know how to say that, the manager of the team, and I am the only one who can speak with them. For example, it's like an agreement, because if you don't know how to communicate with the neighbors or with the authority or something, it maybe could be a problem. But it's not a problem for the project. It's a problem for a communication problem, for example. So yes, we map these problems before they occur.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. I think that that's really important for any kind of project and any kind of intervention, like a really good communication strategy. So thank you very much, Luz, for standing up so early. I know in Mexico you have just started into the day. It's like about 9 o'clock in the morning now. Thanks for sharing your input. Thanks again to Mike for his great presentation as well, and to everybody who was with us here. Thanks for your questions, and I hope you will have a great weekend. So here the sun came out and it's a beautiful autumn day, so everybody have a nice weekend.
Thank you.
See you the next time.
Yes, it is.
Muchas gracias.
De nada, gracias a ustedes.